How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about overtraining syndrome in regards to powerlifting. So I've read a lot about overtraining syndrome, about periodization, and and recovery, and the recovery adaptation syndrome, and these types of things for years now. I read strength and conditioning textbooks, medical textbooks. I read studies. Those studies are referenced in these textbooks. And of course, I also pay attention to a wide variety of athletes' experiences with different protocols and programs, and some of the expert opinions, which are less reliable. And it's very interesting, the picture that you get on many, pretty much any principle in health, wellness, nutrition, and human physiology, when you have such a wide range of resources that you pay attention to and you deeply involve yourself in. You see just such a insane range of possibilities, and you don't really see a lot of facts. So in regards to overtraining, at a baseline, everybody's scared of overtraining, or at the very least, people think that it's necessary to take regular rest days and deloads and stuff like that, because if you don't, then you are going to regress in progress. They think in order for you to keep gaining strength, you've got to take rest days, you've got to take deloads, because otherwise your gains will start to go down the window. So, first of all, there's actually no compelling evidence that training without rest days, there's no compelling evidence that training every single day will create regression and strength gains. So in regards to marathon runners, that's a different story. When we're talking about endurance overtraining or aerobic overtraining syndrome, there are clear, medically defined health markers, blood markers, and definitions of overtraining syndrome, well documented in aerobic overtraining syndrome in marathon athletes. But lifting to a 5 rep max on squat every day is a completely different physiological response than running 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day, 100 miles a week training for a marathon. And as far as what we call anaerobic overtraining, or overtraining syndrome in response to lifting heavy weights, we don't have a well-documented, well-documented health markers, blood markers. We don't have well-documented symptoms that are consistent across the board. We don't have the same kind of compelling evidence for overtraining syndrome in regards to powerlifting and heavy weightlifting as we do with marathon running. And in fact, I was just reading my strength and conditioning textbook last night, and they referenced a study done on exercising men or whatever, like people who exercise but not necessarily elite athletes, where they had them work up to a 1 rep max on a machine squat every single day for a number of weeks. And they found that all subjects continued to make progress in their 1 rep max on their while training every single day to a max, as long as there was 1 rest day per week. And then they did the study again without the rest day, and they found like a quarter of the subjects continue to make strength gains, training 7 days a week to a max, and then 2/4 of the groups, they didn't experience a decrease in performance, and only a very small amount of the subjects actually experienced a decrease in performance. And with 1 rest day, they actually found all of them super compensated and continue to make huge gains after that rest period. So the point here is, even in the studies referenced in medical textbooks, we don't see a regression in performance. In fact, we see continued performance gains. There are many people who have done like squat everyday programs or Bulgarian training without steroids and experienced significant gains over and over again. There's people like Alex and Kiri. He used to have, like, he has a YouTube channel, you should look him up. I don't know how to spell his last name, but he used to be known as Forest of the Wolf's Gym. Maybe you'll find it. But squat every day, Alex and Kiri. Guy said he made the most amazing strength gains of his life. He already had pretty insane, like, later advanced numbers for his body weight on his squat, his deadlift, and his bench. And he made the most amazing, he put on like 100 pounds on his squat within a matter of like 6 months or something by training every day. Then you have Omar Isuf and Greg Knuckles, who made a video where they showed a couple of their athletes who again were already later advanced lifters, who are already lifting like insane numbers for competitive powerlifters, and they put on a large amount of strength in a short amount of time by doing the Bulgarian method. So you have a lot of people who've done this. You have John Bros and his athletes, and they continue to make progress training to a max every single day. For powerlifting, of course. Now, I did this a couple of different times. Back last year, I put on 60 pounds on my pause bench press within 2 weeks. And lots and lots of people have done this. Now so if you read the book, I think his name's Matt Perry, Squat Every Day, he lists a variety of different mechanisms as to how this is possible, and a wide variety of examples of people, including, I forgot his first name. Is it Bob Peoples? He was like a world record deadlift holder who was a farmer in the early 1900s before they had steroids. Deadlifted the most amount of weight before in the pre-steroid era, just because his main routine was deadlifting every single day, just going ham every day. But he was a farmer. He built up that exercise capacity and that recovery capacity to be able to do such a thing without dying. So how do we define overtraining syndrome in regards to powerlifting? Most people say overtraining, you know you're overtraining when you start to see a regression and strength gains. Well, you know, what's interesting is most periodized programs, depending on what you're following, if you're following a program like 531, you'll be able to make strength gains over and over again year round because of the way they set up the PR system. But if you're following like a periodized system, or I think it's block periodization, where you have, a month of high reps, a month of moderate reps, a month of low reps, like, you're going to see regression in strength throughout those months, just because of the way that your program is programmed. But if you just deadlift, or if you just squat to a max every single day throughout those months, instead of periodizing your training like an intelligent person, you'll find that your strength does not regress. And if it does, it only regresses for a couple days and then it rebounds. So, and if you listen to interviews with John Bros, he talks about lots of just crazy experiences that have been validated by many people who have actually tried these programs that are natural, myself included. So regression in progress does not happen from squatting every day, from deadlifting maybe from deadlifting every day. Not a lot of people even want to try that. So you don't see a regression in progress. So then what is overtraining then? So I'll tell you this much. I always feel tired as crap after I lift with it, over 90% of my max, especially after deadlifts. Bench press, not really. Squats, it seems to affect me for a day. Deadlifts seem to make me pretty tired for a couple days. So there is a fatigue component. The main thing you gotta watch out for is injuries, because that's actually what seems to happen, is that people, especially on these squat everyday programs, if they don't moderate their intensity, every now and then, like if you you have an achy knee or you have an achy hip, you'll find that you're going to run into injuries. You'll find that, you'll create a problem from just like hammering those body parts hard on a consistent basis over time. Puts too much wear and tear and stress on the joints and the muscles, and you get an injury. However, if you moderate it, and you just kind of like go easy and you auto-regulate your program around those times, you'll find that most of the time you can lift within maximal range, not experience any injuries, and as long as you're smart about your programming, you don't run into like an ACL tear or something like that, like people do if they go ham. The other thing is people experience ACL tears and these types of injuries lifting, doing a properly periodized program and hitting every body part once a week. So, people still experience overuse injuries even if they're not training every day. So that doesn't necessarily mean you've overtrained. It just means that for whatever reason your body has some type of weakness or deficit and you did not address that properly, regardless of the protocol. So there's that, and that could easily be avoided on a squat everyday program simply by auto-regulating. And again, I'm not trying to make an advertisement for squatting every day or Bulgarian, but when we're talking about overtraining, Bulgarian systems completely fly in the face of what we think of as overtraining. So overuse injuries are not necessarily this overtraining syndrome we talk about. Regression does not happen. You don't regress in strength on these overtraining programs. So that doesn't seem to be it either. How about fatigue and depression and stuff like that? So obviously fatigue and depression can have a wide variety of causes. Fatigue and depression can be caused by, relationship issues. It can be caused by it can be caused by losing a loved one. Nutritional deficiencies. If you're not eating enough highly bioavailable protein for your body, obviously you're going to have a neurotransmitter deficiency because of a deficiency in amino acids like tyrosine. So your body can't produce feel-good neurotransmitters, which can create depression. Dehydration can create fatigue and depression. I mean, there's a lot of things that can contribute to these things. So does it mean that you're overtraining necessarily if you feel depressed or low energy? Not really. But the fact is, after heavy weight training sessions, you're likely to feel tired. And if you're lifting to a 1 rep max on a squat every single day, I mean, with most people's squats, you can lift a large amount of weight. Not nearly as much as a deadlift, but still enough to create so much neural fatigue that you'll feel fatigued. So the main thing is, when you're training for powerlifting, you're just going to feel tired all the time, and that's it. But the thing is, again, people tend to feel this way regardless of how often they're training. After a heavy training session, you're going to feel tired. The other thing is, the more often you train a certain way, the more likely your body is to adapt to it. So if you're training, if you're doing the squat 3 days a week, at first you're going to feel like shit. After 4 weeks, maybe give yourself a deload or something, your body gets used to it, usually. But regardless, your body's going to feel pretty tired after any kind of intense exertion, usually, most of the time, until it gets used to it. So it's possible that fatigue is a symptom of overtraining from powerlifting. That might be the only thing. There's been studies like John Bro's did a study on his athletes where he actually found increased cortisol and decreased testosterone during an intense overreaching phase of training every day for a long period of time. But he also found if you continue training hard through your hormones tanking, eventually your hormones supercompensate. And he calls it adrenal supercompensation, where your adrenal glands adapt to the training stress. And apparently, after a couple months of training through the high estrogen, low testosterone, high cortisol times, which he calls the dark times, you feel like crap for those months, but eventually your body bounces back, and now you have an overwhelmingly high capacity to adapt to the hard training. And so now you can train even harder and not worry about feeling like crap. Now, how credible is that to most people? Probably not applicable to most people. But it is the closest thing we have to like showing what happens when you overtrain in a powerlifting setting, is that your hormones will tank. But it's possible that you can adapt to that, to your hormones tanking. Knowing what I know about carbohydrate metabolism and ketogenic metabolism, and how your body can actually adapt to eating zero dietary carbohydrates, and it can start to produce glycogen on its own endogenously, which again, most people hear that and think it's crazy. And then of course the mainstream, they constantly say you need these carbs for glycogen, which you actually don't. It does not surprise me, or it would not surprise me, if the body has some kind of mechanism that allows it to adapt to this crazy training stress over time. And the adaptation phase to burning fat as fuel in a ketogenic state can be like hell for most people. And most people are convinced that it's that they need carbs for athletic performance. But after a month, 2 months of going through this hell, your body actually sees an increase in performance, and you feel amazing, and you're like, holy shit, I wish I would have done this a long time ago. So there's a possibility that your body can adapt to its recovery. Like, you can possibly train recovery is the point here. So fatigue. So as far as this whole idea of fatigue is concerned, we have something called the central governor theory, which I believe was created from Tim Noakes. That's where I heard it from, at least. So the central governor theory basically is this idea that when we put the body through insane training stress, it responds as if it's about to die. If you squat to that 1 rep max again soon, you might die, because it detects that 1 rep max squat as like a giant oak tree falling on you or something. And then it generates just enough neural force to like push that tree off of you and survive. And now the body produces serotonin and other neurotransmitters to calm you down, and to make you feel like shit, make you feel like you don't want to do anything, make you want to crawl up in your cave and sleep, because the body wants to preserve its DNA so it can continue to reproduce. It doesn't want you to go and kill yourself. So as a protective mechanism to prevent you from exercising to death, it makes you feel tired and lethargic through increasing serotonin. Now, according to central governor theory, this does not mean physiological overtraining syndrome. It just means the body detected the threat, and now it's trying to prevent you from, killing that, going through that threat again. Now, it does not mean if you go right back to that threat, if you go right back to that oak tree and you try lifting it up again, it doesn't mean that you're going to see a regression in performance. The body actually wants to be able to survive that at all costs. So as a protective mechanism, the body makes you feel tired, like you don't want to do it again. But as a survival mechanism, the body will try its best to adapt to that stress, to that threat, no matter what. It would rather you go back in your cave, because it doesn't want for you to be put in danger. That's why most people have an addiction to laziness, because the body generally doesn't want you to do anything you don't have to do. It wants to just reproduce and be fine with it. But if you do happen to go there, computer just turned off. If you do happen to go back to that tree log and try to lift it again, the body wants to try to have some kind of mechanism for adapting to it, for surviving it. So, if you want to survive the squatting every day, you're going to feel like shit because your body's trying to prevent you from going out of your comfort zone. But it'll still adapt. Now, this is on a neurological level. Strength is mostly neurological. The Bulgarian method is based on forcing neurological adaptations, not muscular adaptations. So it has nothing to do with joint injuries and stuff like that. Joint injuries, muscular injuries, and things like that will happen independently of what's going on with your nervous system. Now, it's true if you're more neurally fatigued, if you're more tired and you feel whatever this fatigue is, you're more likely to get injured because you may not be paying as much attention. Maybe your, what do you call it, precipitation, your body's environmental awareness is going to be lower. Your reflexes will be lower. Not because of overtraining, but because of whatever this fatigue feeling is. And so you might be at a more risk for injury. Caffeine can help you overcome that. Lots of things can help you overcome that. But that does not necessarily mean overtraining. It does not mean you're at risk of dying or you're going to regress in performance. It just means you're tired. And so if you are not careful, you might injure yourself. Now, this is where we talk about other life stressors. If you choose to do this kind of use this theory here, where you're like, so if your main goal is powerlifting, you can just hammer it hard over and over again, keep seeing strength gains, and just feel tired as fuck all the time. Okay? As long as you auto-regulate and you train smart, you're not going to see the injuries. And you can continue to see linear progress for a long time. As crazy as that sounds, people do it all the time. Bob Peoples. Read the book Squat Every Day. However, if you have a relationship, do not expect to feel, it's going to be hard to have a relationship because of all the fatigue that's been generated. It's going to be hard to maintain a business, because if you're, depending on what kind of business it is, if it requires a lot of mental focus, if it requires a lot of mental energy, it's going to be pretty damn hard because you're using all your energy on that source, on that thing. And you have a lot less energy for other things. That's kind of where this plays into. It has nothing to do with necessarily physical stress, as people try to say it does. It has more to do with what's going on with your mental health and your psychology more so. The neurotransmitter aspect. Pretty much you'll have symptoms of depressive disorders and things like that. Possibly over time. That can make regular life hard. Because this training, based on the central governor theory, which I think is the most logical explanation for why you can continue to progress, but just feel like shit, it's not physical. It's completely neurological, neurotransmitters and things. So all the things that require strong neurology and neurochemical balance, they're going to be affected. So that is the main thing you got to keep in mind. However, there's a lot of people who do just fine training every single day, and they don't have these sets of problems. So it might depend on the individual, and maybe there's an adaptation required for that, right? If you're an athlete, if you're doing MMA, if you're doing jiu-jitsu, if you're doing football training and you're doing the squat everyday program and stuff like that, maybe you can adapt to it, but there's a high likelihood that it's going to be much more challenging for you to acquire the skills in skill training, the skills in practice, and you're going to be at a higher risk of injury, possibly, okay, because of all of this, because of the high neurological demand of the squat everyday program. Now, conversely, because you're squatting every day, you might have more mobility, you might have stronger joints, and maybe it'll prevent injury. So there's a lot of possibilities involved in this, and it's not clear, cut, and dry. So there was a couple other things that I wanted to mention here, but they kind of escaped my brain. So maybe I'll get to them in another video. But essentially, what I'm saying here is that so like prisoners, you know, so there's like pretty much the majority of people that spend time in jail training, you know, they all say overtraining is a myth because they've seen people in jail just train hardcore all the time, getting great results without, you know, any need for a deload, and they're training all day, every day. They're eating shit food, they're not really sleeping well, but yet they see strength gains, they see muscle gains. And so, and these people are convinced, you know, that these people aren't taking steroids, and they're convinced that overtraining is a myth, and it all has to do with your mentality surrounding it. Obviously, in a jail-like setting, it's a lot more like what we would experience as cave people. Constant threat of getting jumped or something, of getting attacked by a threat. You know, food is scarce, sleep is scarce. I mean, that sounds a lot like primitive men. And they're constantly training, and they're not sleeping. Horrible conditions, yet they still see progress. Now, obviously, the main difference, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but the biggest causal reason why people in prison get better strength gains than people in the free world is because people in prison, they don't have, you know, the internet and all these things that they can constantly research overtraining and bodybuilding.com and all this crap. And all that they have is the will to survive and the will to keep themselves sane. And so they're not training for all the other reasons that people on the outside are. They're training mainly because that's what keeps them sane, but also to make themselves meaner, stronger, and to keep them to survive. And because they don't give a shit about overtraining, and because it doesn't even matter, they don't even care if they die, they're training themselves hardcore to death. And so they don't have the limiting factors of psychology that people on the outside do, and they experience those crazy gains. They get yoked when they come out of prison. Not saying that there's not steroids in prison, because I'm sure certain ones do have, you know, some people have mentioned that they do, some of them do have steroids and stuff, but, you know, from everything that I can see, it seems like the main contributor towards overtraining syndrome and powerlifting, and possibly even MMA and things like that, are either like extreme caloric restriction or it's a neurological thing. You know, the only exception is injuries. Injuries are much more likely to happen, and fatigue is much more likely to happen if you train hardcore all the damn time. However, the fatigue can be overcome with motivation and thought strategies. You know, if you have a habit of only training once a week, it's going to be very hard to buy in to the idea that you can train every single day hardcore. And most people don't want to do that. Most people have all sorts of other things. They have girlfriends, they have jobs, they have, you know, all sorts of other things they have to take care of. So even if they could train every day, they wouldn't want to. So with that being said, is overtraining a myth? I wouldn't say overtraining is a myth. I would just say that there's no evidence for what we know is of overtraining, what most people think of as overtraining. And overtraining that we don't even have a clear definition of it. How is it quantified other than heart rate variability and cortisol concentration? It's not quantified by performance decreases. So it's not, most people don't, they talk about overtraining, but they don't know what it is. And it doesn't seem to have one static thing. It's very nuanced. So leave your question, comments down below. Let me know if you watch this whole thing. I'll talk to y'all next time.